ChatGPT said. The galaxy's deadliest fleet hung above Earth like a wall of black steel, engines burning with cold blue fire as millions of eyes on the planet below turned upward in silence, waiting for death to rain down, waiting for fire to erase cities, families, and the fragile hope that had lasted until this day. But instead of immediate destruction, the invaders broadcast a single message across every channel, their voice echoing in 100 languages: submit or be destroyed, and the words chilled every listener, shaking leaders and citizens alike. Yet humanity did not answer at once. There was no begging, no surrender, no desperate cries, only silence. And in that silence, fear turned into something else, because Earth's people had known this day might come, and still they waited. Still they refused to bow, and even the alien fleet was unsettled by this lack of response, for they were used to terror, to instant submission, not to silence. The commander of the fleet, Varak the Conqueror, stood on his flagship's bridge, his armor etched with scars from battles fought over centuries, his face hard and cold, his black eyes studying the blue planet below as he remembered 1,000 other worlds that had burned beneath his command. None had resisted, none had dared to leave a message unanswered, but Earth was different, and though he would never admit it aloud, the silence disturbed him, because silence was not surrender. Silence was a choice. Behind him, his lieutenants shifted uneasily, eager for his command to fire, to unleash death and prove again why the galaxy feared his name. Yet he held them back, for something in the stillness of this world made him hesitate, not out of mercy, but out of calculation, because he had learned across long wars that strange opponents required caution. On Earth, in a hidden command bunker deep beneath Geneva, Captain Elena Ruiz stood before a wall of screens, her uniform simple but her eyes sharp, her voice calm as she addressed the trembling council of human leaders who demanded to know what must be done. And though she was younger than most of them, they listened, for her reputation as a negotiator had grown in these last years of tension. She had spoken with allies, with rivals, even with enemies, and she believed in a truth most others ignored, that humanity's greatest weapon was not always found in ships or guns, but in how they chose to respond when everyone expected war. She watched the broadcast again, the threat of annihilation flashing in harsh alien symbols, and then she did something no one expected. She ordered the silence to continue. She told Earth's leaders, "Do not reply in anger. Do not reply in fear. Let them wonder." And the council erupted in disbelief, calling her reckless, calling her naive. But Elena only stared at the screens where the alien fleet hung above her world and whispered to herself, "They want war, but war is not what they will get." Hours passed. The alien fleet grew restless, their weapons primed, their armies waiting to descend, but still Earth sent no answer. And finally Varak gave a low growl and ordered his scouts to scan the planet for weakness, for signs of panic. But what they found unsettled them more, because instead of chaos, Earth seemed strangely calm. People gathering in shelters, children being led into safety, hospitals readying supplies. Not with despair but with grim determination, as if they faced a storm, not the end of everything, and Varak's jaw tightened as he wondered why these humans did not tremble. Then, without warning, something even stranger happened. A signal left Earth, not a cry for surrender, not a declaration of war, but a transmission carrying a simple offer: medical aid to the alien fleet's injured soldiers, for their spies had already revealed that many ships carried wounded from earlier campaigns, casualties hidden away, and Elena Ruiz herself sent the message, her voice steady as she spoke directly to the conqueror of 1,000 worlds. "We know you carry the wounded. We offer aid. Send them down, and we will heal them." The words spread like fire through the alien fleet, whispered in disbelief, for no enemy in the history of the Empire had ever offered mercy before the battle even began, and many soldiers muttered among themselves that it was a trap. Others sneered that it was weakness, but a few, quiet and afraid, felt something more dangerous stirring inside them: doubt. On the bridge, Varak froze, his dark eyes narrowing as he replayed the message again and again, unable to believe that the humans, fragile and soft, would risk resources on those who had come to kill them. But there it was, no threat, no bargain, only an offer of care, and he felt the weight of centuries press down on him, for he knew armies were built on fear and hate, yet mercy could rot them from within. His lieutenants urged him to ignore the humans, to fire and finish this planet before their kindness spread weakness through the ranks, but Verak hesitated, for though he despised compassion, he also understood power, and this was a new kind of power, one he had never faced before, and in the quiet of his mind he wondered if this was the weapon Earth had chosen. Down on Earth, Elena Ruiz stood by her decision, though her colleagues called her insane, though her own soldiers demanded to know why she would help the enemy, and she answered with the calm conviction that had guided her since the war began. Because mercy can wound deeper than bullets. Let them come, let them see who we are. Outside, the skies rumbled as alien ships shifted formation, uncertain whether to descend in fire or in trust, and across both sides of the battlefield, humans and aliens alike held their breath, waiting to see if the first act of this war would be destruction, or an act of mercy that could change everything. The skies above Earth stayed heavy with the shadow of the alien fleet, and though no missiles fell, the tension pressed on every heart like a storm that had not yet broken, and in that uneasy pause, Commander Verak made a choice that startled his own officers. He agreed to test the humans' strange offer, sending not an army but a group of scouts and watchers, soldiers trained in the art of suspicion, spies wrapped in shadows of loyalty to the Empire, and their orders were simple: observe, infiltrate, and uncover whether this so-called mercy was a trap. And so in secret dropships they descended through clouds into the night, landing on empty fields far from human cities, cloaking their forms, moving like ghosts into the hospitals where Earth's doctors waited. Captain Elena Ruiz had prepared those hospitals with steady hands. She had spoken to the doctors, the nurses, the volunteers, reminding them that the first contact between healer and wounded enemy would echo louder than any speech. And so, when the alien spies arrived disguised among the injured, they saw something that made their blood stir uneasily, for instead of fear or hatred, the humans met them with calm care, laying the wounded on beds, wrapping them in warmth, touching their strange skin with gloves and gentle hands, not flinching at the sharp teeth or scaled flesh, but speaking soft words of comfort they could not even be sure the aliens understood, and the spies who had expected poison or cruelty found instead the tender silence of healing. One spy, Koresh, who had seen villages burned to dust by his own fleet, felt his chest tighten as a human child walked through the ward carrying water and blankets, smiling at warriors who had come to kill her people, offering the smallest kindness without hesitation, and in that moment Koresh turned his head away, ashamed that an enemy's child could show him a humanity his own empire had long forgotten. The spies moved deeper, taking note of every gesture, every detail, searching for signs of manipulation, but all they found was sincerity, and this unsettled them more than any weapon could, because on a dozen conquered worlds they had seen terror. They had seen false bargains where kindness was a mask for betrayal, yet here no bargain was made, no price demanded, only healing freely given. And their reports back to Verak grew uneasy, their coded words unable to hide the confusion slipping into their voices. Verak listened in silence on his command throne, his face carved in stone, hearing his scouts describe human doctors working without rest, treating alien wounds as if they were their own, and though his officers muttered that it was weakness, Verak knew the truth was far more dangerous, for weakness bends. But this was something that stood firm, a choice made with strength, and he began to fear that his soldiers, long hardened by conquest, might see this too, and wonder why they had never been treated as more than tools of war. Meanwhile, Elena Ruiz watched carefully from her command center, reading the incoming updates, aware that spies must be among the wounded, but she allowed it. She wanted them to see, because her gamble was not about hiding strength, but about showing a kind of strength the Empire had forgotten existed, and though her advisors called her reckless, she believed that even spies could carry seeds of doubt back to the heart of the enemy fleet. Days passed, and whispers spread in the alien camps above, whispers that the humans were not what the Empire had claimed. that instead of cowards hiding behind fragile walls, they were healers who faced death with open hands, and these whispers traveled faster than orders, slipping into the hearts of wounded soldiers, into the silence of barracks where warriors began to ask dangerous questions, questions about why they fought, why mercy felt like defeat when it also felt like relief. Veyrak grew restless, his command slipping into unease, and he summoned his spies one by one to stand before him and explain what they had seen. But even hardened men like Koresh hesitated under his gaze, unable to deny that Earth's actions had unsettled them, unable to keep the memory of gentle hands from creeping into their words, and though Veyrak snarled at them to remember their oaths, he knew too well that doubt had already entered his fleet like a sickness. On Earth, Elena Ruiz did not celebrate. She knew this was only the beginning, that confusion could breed chaos as easily as peace, and she prepared her people for the storm still looming overhead. But in her heart she also knew one thing with certainty. Mercy had struck a blow no weapon could match, and now both sides were trapped in a dangerous new silence, waiting to see whether the seed of doubt would bloom into rebellion or be crushed under the Empire's iron hand. The Empire's fleet hung in the sky like a storm frozen in time, its thousands of warships cloaked in silence, but inside those ships something dangerous had begun to stir. Soldiers whispered in the barracks, engineers spoke in shadows, and even battle-scarred veterans who had conquered 100 worlds now sat awake at night haunted by the memory of human kindness. And Veyrak, watching this slow unraveling, felt rage coil in his chest like a serpent, for he knew doubt could kill an army faster than any weapon. So he summoned his high council and declared before them that hesitation was a disease, and disease must be cut out with fire. His plan was simple, brutal, and meant to break the whispers. He would take a group of prisoners from Earth, innocent civilians, and he would order their execution in front of the fleet to prove that kindness meant nothing, that mercy was weakness, that the Empire remained strong. Yet even as he spoke the words, a silence settled over the room, a silence not of loyalty but of unease, and though none dared speak against him, he saw the flicker of hesitation in their eyes. Among those who heard his command was Koresh, the spy who had seen a child smile as she handed him water, and though his body bowed in obedience, his heart twisted, torn between the oath he had sworn and the truth he could no longer deny, that humans had shown him more honor than the Empire ever had. On Earth, Captain Elena Ruiz sensed the shift. She read the coded transmissions, the intercepted fragments of alien speech, and though the words were broken, the meaning was clear. Veyrak was planning something cruel, something meant to crush the very mercy she had planted in the minds of his soldiers, and she knew if he succeeded, the fragile thread she had spun between the two sides would snap, leaving only blood and war. So she acted quickly, gathering her council, explaining that mercy had bought them time but not safety, and that the next test would demand more courage than before. Her advisors urged her to strengthen defenses, to prepare for an invasion, but Elena shook her head. She believed that the real battle was not fought with weapons but with choices, and if she could turn even one of Veyrak's commanders, the Empire itself might fracture. Unknown to her, Koresh and 2 others had already begun to meet in secret, their loyalty cracking like glass, speaking in hushed voices about what they had seen on Earth, about whether it was betrayal to question their empire or if it was betrayal to stay silent. And though fear held them back, the seed had already grown too deep to kill. When Veyrak's order finally came, the fleet trembled, not from fear of humans but from the shadow of its own conscience, and in the great chamber, where prisoners were brought forth, human civilians stood silently under alien lights, their faces calm despite the rows of soldiers aiming weapons at them, and in that tense moment Koresh felt his breath choke, for he saw among them the same child who had once smiled at him, the child who had shown him mercy when he had deserved none, and as Veyrak raised his hand to give the order, Koresh's body moved before his mind could stop it, stepping forward, shouting words that cracked through the chamber like thunder. No, this is not strength, this is fear. The silence that followed was heavier than any gunfire, soldiers staring at him in shock, their discipline cracking, their hearts pounding with the truth they had all tried to bury, and Verak's eyes burned with fury, but in that instant the seed of rebellion had sprouted in full view of the Empire. On Earth, Elena Ruiz watched the broadcast leak across channels, her eyes wide, her breath sharp, for she knew what she was seeing was impossible, yet real. The first fracture in the Empire's armor, born not from her weapons, but from the mercy of a single child. And as the transmission cut to static, she whispered to herself that the true war had finally begun, not between fleets, but inside the soul of the Empire itself. The chamber still echoed with Koresh's defiance, his voice hanging like a blade over every soldier who had witnessed it, and though Verak's fury was swift, ordering Koresh bound, stripped of rank, and dragged away, the damage was already done, because silence had turned into whispers and whispers had turned into questions that spread through the fleet like fire on dry grass, and no amount of punishment could erase what the soldiers had seen. A human child spared, a commander standing against his own emperor, and the truth that perhaps mercy was not weakness but something stronger than fear. Verak, consumed by rage, summoned his war council and demanded immediate action. No more delays, no more hesitation. He ordered the fleet to prepare for full planetary bombardment, declaring that Earth must be reduced to ash before its poison of kindness infected any more of his people. Yet even as he spoke with fire, he sensed the hesitation in their eyes, the subtle tightening of jaws, the flicker of doubt they tried to hide. Determined to crush resistance before it could spread, Verak commanded executions, not of humans this time, but of his own soldiers, those who had been caught whispering, those who had been slow to obey, those who had shown even the faintest hesitation, and his cruelty sent a ripple of fear that he mistook for loyalty, but in truth it deepened the quiet rebellion already brewing. For every death planted new questions in the minds of those who survived. On Earth, Captain Elena Ruiz watched the skies darken as the alien fleet shifted into attack formation, reports flooding in of energy buildups across their warships, and though her advisors urged her to strike preemptively with Earth's limited weapons, she refused, knowing that one wrong move could shatter the fragile divide inside the Empire. So instead she called for broadcasts, images of hospitals treating alien wounded, videos of human children offering food and water to alien prisoners. Voices of kindness transmitted openly for the Empire's soldiers to hear, and though some on Earth called her naive, Elena believed this was their strongest weapon, for mercy was now a mirror reflecting the Empire's cruelty back at itself. In secret, however, she also began preparing fallback plans, moving civilians underground, fortifying bunkers, and ordering her few warships into defensive positions, because she knew that even if kindness could fracture an empire, Verak would not hesitate to drown Earth in fire to preserve his rule. Meanwhile, Koresh, shackled and bleeding in a prison cell aboard the flagship, whispered to the guards who came to torment him, asking them simple questions. Had they ever wondered why humans, fragile and weak, did not beg for mercy but instead offered it? Had they ever felt the strange calm in their hearts when kindness touched them? Had they ever realized that perhaps the Empire feared this more than any weapon, because it could not be conquered by force, and his words, though dismissed with laughter, burrowed deep into their thoughts, resurfacing in the quiet hours when they were alone, staring out into the void of space. Among the guards was a young officer named Sarek, who had once believed in Verak's vision without question, but who now found himself unable to sleep, his mind circling back to the human child's calm eyes and Koresh's defiance, and though he told no one, his loyalty had begun to fracture. As the countdown to bombardment neared, tension gripped both sides, the Empire's fleet pulsing with destructive energy, Earth's cities bracing for annihilation, and Elena Ruiz, standing in her command center, stared at the star maps with steady eyes, whispering to herself that if kindness had shaken the Empire once, it could do so again. But the question that burned in her heart was whether it would be enough to stop the fire Verak was about to unleash. The galaxy itself seemed to hold its breath, caught between two paths, one of mercy that terrified conquerors and one of cruelty that had ruled for centuries. And in that fragile moment before the storm, both humans and aliens knew that the next choice would decide not just the fate of Earth, but the soul of the Empire. The order to fire came like thunder across the fleet. Verak's voice cold and sharp, demanding every cannon unleash destruction upon Earth, and for a moment the sky lit with energy as weapons charged, glowing with deadly light. But then hesitation rippled through the ranks, subtle at first, a pause in the hands of gunners, a flicker of doubt in the eyes of officers, and in that heartbeat of silence something shifted, because Koresh's whispers, Elena's broadcasts, and the memory of human mercy had sunk too deep, and when the flagship's cannon should have roared, half of them stayed silent, their crews refusing to obey, their voices trembling but firm as they said they would not slaughter those who had shown them kindness. Verak's rage was instant, his roar shaking the chamber as he struck down one officer with his own blade, blood staining the floor, and he demanded loyalty. But instead of fear, the killing sparked open defiance, one captain stepping forward on the comm to declare, "We are not butchers. We will not murder children who offered us water," and his words echoed through the fleet like a war cry of rebellion. Chaos erupted, ships turning on one another, loyalists firing upon dissenters, space itself lighting with explosions not aimed at Earth, but within the Empire's own lines, and for the first time in centuries, the iron unity of conquest cracked wide open into civil war. On Earth, Elena Ruiz and her team watched the impossible unfold on their screens, the alien fleet tearing itself apart, and though cheers filled the command center, Elena's face remained grave, because she knew Verak was still alive, still furious, and a cornered beast was always most dangerous, so she ordered her forces to hold, to wait, not to strike at the rebels or the loyalists, but to let the Empire bleed itself from within. For every missile Earth fired now might unite them again under fear, and she would not give Verak that gift. In his cell, Koresh heard the alarms, the tremors of battle shaking the walls, and Sarek, the young officer who had once guarded him with disdain, burst in, keys trembling in his hand, whispering that the time had come, that Verak would kill them all if nothing changed, and though Koresh's body was broken, his spirit burned as he rose, chains falling away, knowing his place was not at Earth's side but among his people, to prove that mercy could wield more power than fear. Verak, desperate to maintain control, activated the flagship's core weapon, a supercannon capable of cracking Earth's crust in a single blast, and as he prepared to fire, he broadcast across the fleet that anyone who hesitated would burn with the humans, but his voice, once absolute, now carried cracks of desperation, and soldiers who had once obeyed, without thought now questioned if this was truly strength or the last madness of a ruler undone. The rebels rallied around Koresh, their voices spreading ship to ship, not promising victory, not offering riches, but reminding everyone of the simple act that had begun it all, a fragile human risking her life to save an enemy, a kindness that had planted rebellion stronger than fear, and more ships broke ranks, their cannons turning not toward Earth, but toward Verak's flagship, their fire-shattering shields, their defiance roaring louder than his threats. The battlefield above Earth became a storm of betrayal, rebellion, and desperate loyalty, ships burning, wreckage raining through the atmosphere, the sky lit with fire as alien against alien tore apart the once invincible fleet, and humanity watched, stunned, realizing that their survival did not come from weapons or armies, but from a strength the galaxy had never understood, compassion that had infected even the hardest hearts. Yet amidst the chaos, Elena knew the war was not finished, because Verak still stood, his flagship still armed, and his wrath now aimed not only at Earth, but at the rebels who dared defy him, and the question that burned across every soldier, every civilian, every heart watching was the same. Would mercy be enough to topple a warlord who knew only fear, or would his final act of destruction consume them all? The flagship burned like a dying star, flames crawling along its hull, but Verak still stood at its heart, his armor cracked, his body bleeding, yet his eyes blazing with fury, his hands locked on the controls of the supercannon, the weapon that could tear Earth open and end millions of lives in a single breath, and with a roar he swore that if he could not rule through fear, he would leave only ashes. But in the chaos Koresh, weak yet unbroken, reached the command chamber, carried by rebels who once feared him, and when their eyes met it was not as commander and warlord but as two brothers of the same race split by choices, one clinging to terror, the other to mercy, and in that clash hung the fate of Earth and the Empire. Elena Ruiz, watching from Earth's command center, saw the cannon charging, its glow brighter than the sun, and though her generals begged her to fire every missile, to end the flagship now, she shook her head, whispering that mercy had carried them this far, and striking first would undo everything. So she ordered silence, once more, her heart pounding, trusting strangers across the void to choose humanity's path instead of vengeance. Koresh spoke not with threats, but with a quiet voice that cut through the screams and alarms, reminding Verac that the Empire's soldiers had turned not because of human weapons, but because of human kindness, because a fragile medic had saved a dying enemy, because compassion had broken chains fear could not, and though Verac laughed, calling it weakness, his hand trembled, the weight of centuries of conquest pressing against the single act that now shook him more than war. As the cannon reached its final charge, the rebels struck, not with guns but with a desperate gamble, ripping power cables and sacrificing their own lives to slow the weapon, and Koresh, with the last strength in his body, hurled himself at Verac, not to kill but to tear him from the console, both of them falling in a storm of sparks as the weapon collapsed inward, exploding in a shockwave that consumed the flagship but spared Earth. Silence followed, the sky clearing of fire as the remaining ships, battered and broken, lowered their weapons, their commanders broadcasting surrender, not out of defeat but out of choice, because they had seen something greater than fear. On Earth, crowds poured into the streets, not cheering victory through war but through mercy, their voices rising in one cry that humanity had faced annihilation, and one not with guns but with compassion, and in the ruins of the flagship Koresh lived, scarred and fragile, carried by rebels who now saw him as a leader, while Verac, broken and defeated, whispered with disbelief that fear had finally lost. Elena Ruiz, standing before the world, spoke simply, saying that the greatest weapon humanity had shown the galaxy was not strength but kindness, and across the stars, whispers spread of a new empire rising, not of conquest but of mercy, and though the war was over, the story was only beginning, for now the galaxy had learned the one truth it feared most, that kindness was more frightening than war.